Hey, Monte.
Hello, William.
So this is going to be some show tonight, everybody. Today, Monte, Farber, and I, William Stickevers, on October 30th, 2020, on the eve of Halloween, are going to talk about Halloween and divination. And of course, in the second half of our presentation today, we'll touch upon the U.S. general election and how that is shaping up. So,
You're a brave
Monte,
man.
you're a brave man too, my friend.
Thank
So
you.
I was going to start off initially going into Halloween, but I wanted to really touch right off the bat with your divination creations and products. I think it's really interesting that you're one of the few astrologers that out there that actually have produced divination, tangible divination products over the years. You're one of the
Yes.
innovators back, I believe, back in the 80s, late 80s, early
Yeah.
90s when you got into this. And you were just way ahead of everybody else out there. And I want you to talk about that. And then I think we can weave that into the Halloween and take a deeper dive in divination in regards to astrology. So I'm going to go to my first slide here and just talk a little bit here about what we're looking at here with all your divination creations and your
Wow.
history.
In the early 1980s, I went to a lot of parties out here in the Hamptons. Actually, before that, and I used to do astrology stuff. I would ask people, and I would tell them stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then one person said, "Well, why don't you? I wish you were here. I wish we could do this when you weren't here." So I said, well, I'll invent a game. And so I went home and on file cards, took me a while because this was before computers. I broke the cards down into planet signs and houses. So like here's the South Node, which is woo, the big no,
Right.
and it has sentence fragments. And when you have a planet, a sign, and a house, when you have a planet, a sign, and a house, it makes a
Right.
sentence.
Right.
So it's like
Right.
resurrect and on the physical, spiritual, and mental level. And and I sold it on the first shot. I went to the book fair. A friend of mine was going to do it, and then she said, "We're too small. You should go with a bigger company." And I sold it to the company that had done the rune stones on the
Wow.
first shot.
Mm-hmm.
I went up to their booth. I said, "I have an astrology card game that tells the future." They said, "Let's play it." We played it. Gave a North Node in second house and
Right.
Taurus,
Right.
but it was all on file cards.
Right.
And I
Right.
said, "Well, what did you ask?" I said, "Well, we asked if we should publish your book." It says yes, and then we shook hands, and that was it.
And
And
history was made.
well, yeah, because when it finally came out, I worked on it. We sold it to Penguin Books,
Right.
and when it finally came out, it was the year that Nancy Reagan was found to use an astrologer.
Right. Joan
So,
Quigley. That was her
ex
name.
yes, exactly, and she was actually quite a conservative person, and
Right.
and
In San Francisco, nonetheless.
yes, yes, well, like Nob Hill, right?
Exactly. Yes.
She was a Nob Hill astrologer, and because of the Joan Quigley and Reagan and beating the 0 year curse, it went from 15,000 to 55,000 first printing, and
Wow.
it's still in print. It's gone through, and it's in 18 languages.
How many editions?
Oh my God, I can't even count them. It's gone from looking like this, and then it's too much packaging, and then smaller
Right.
packaging, and now this was what I just showed was from the 25th anniversary or 30th anniversary
Wow.
edition. Yeah,
Wow.
and there have been other astrology divination for people who don't know what divination is. Divination is basically getting in touch with the divine within you and using a method, some kind of method. I mean, Nostradamus used a flame that he used to gaze at. Some people think astrology itself, you look at the chart and you get intuitions, but there's more to science to astrology, obviously.
Hmm.
And so I enjoyed the success of that book. We built Amy's studio, we did a lot of stuff, and then we went on to do the Enchanted Tarot. And we always try and popularize stuff.
Hmm.
We're
Right.
not coming in with let me show you the depth of my knowledge. We're coming in with I understand you don't know anything about this, and we're going to help you. If you're interested in it, we're going to help you get into it. So I've gotten a lot of people into astrology, tarot, goddesses. I was politically correct before it was. I'm I'm hoisted on my own petard now, but in Goddess Guide Me, I don't see it there in the pictures, but that was in 1990, and we were already talking about herstory and all kinds of goddess stuff, and
Right,
the
right.
problems with the world.
Lemuria, Atlantis. This is when it was all
Yeah.
going mainstream, right?
Oh yeah, and
Yeah.
we're part of that, a part of that movement. I'm very proud of it. Enchanted Tarot's been out since 1990. That's there. The Psychic Circle. We even took on the talking boards. We're out there.
Right,
We're out
right.
there,
I
and
mean,
we're
there's
out
a
there.
right, right. So you were like, I mean, I would think, based on what I know of the history of the New Age movement, we saw the first outbursts post World War II occur in the 60s during the countercultural revolution. Then there
Right,
was a second revival, and that happened uh, again in California, like we saw at the Haight-Ashbury,
right.
during the Haight-Ashbury period in the late 60s. We saw it occur again in West Hollywood with the Bodhi Tree. I think it's called the Bodhi Tree
Yeah, I was there
bookstore.
many times.
Right.
Stan and Phil.
Right. And the Aquarian, what was it called? The Aquarian Conspiracy was published. And that was like the
Yeah.
second big wave. And that wave lasted, if I remember, my memory serves me correct, from around 1980 well into, let's say, I would say into the late 90s, around 98, 99. It was this massive surge in interest and major proliferation of new age stores,
Yeah,
particularly in conservative Republican Long Island.
yeah. There were a lot of them.
Right. I mean, so this was
Yeah,
it was just, I remember at that time where if you could read tarot cards, do astrology, there was massive demand, right, where these
yeah.
stores were seeking people out, and that's how I got started. I got a phone call and
Huh.
from a client who talked to one of the store owners in Port Jefferson, and that store owner said, could you come in? I'd like to interview you. Would you be interested in doing readings? We can split it
Wow.
50-50, blah blah blah. And at the time I had a lunchbox size notebook computer with an orange screen that could generate charts on
Wow.
on demand. I mean, it was, yeah, this is like the late 80s. It's around 80, 89,
Right.
September of 89 when this all happened. And at the time, there was three other new age stores in the same town of Port Jefferson that were competing against each other.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
You don't see that happening now.
No, I mean, no. I mean, we had a store for a couple of years, and then there was a place in Sag Harbor, metaphysical books and tools, but they're gone. We're
Right.
gone.
Right. Absolutely. So, it's just not the same anymore. And now it's all on the internet, which is great. But it's just
Yeah.
not the same. You don't, to a lot of the millennials and up and coming Gen Zers, it's not the same, right? It's just not the same on the internet. I mean, you've got a
No,
lot
there,
more.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Go
there
ahead.
there are bookstores now coming back, actually, strangely
Okay.
enough.
Right.
Like Soultopia in Dallas, they have two stores. It's run
Right.
by a former prosecutor, attorney, a woman who ran, could be a judge, and she got into this, and she's into it, and she's
Yep.
like now, it's coming back. But you're right. The internet doesn't give you the interaction of like those places used to be like a community hub, a social.
Absolutely. Because it was not only like they had the books, they had the supplies, they had the herbs. They would often teach
Yeah,
classes, and they would, if they had room, they would do classes, or they would have little nightly meetings once a week. They would have readers come in, tarot readers on weekends, or astrologers, or people who did other forms of divination. And it was a big scene. And I know people who would actually hook up with other people who had similar interests at
yeah,
that time, right? Who, if they were
right.
single, right, that was an area where they could go and they could share, their interest with others. And I've seen a lot of people who ended up going into long-term relationships, some of them who actually got married from that type of community hub that was
Well, yeah, I always told
prolific.
my nephews, I was a rock musician. I always told my nephews, forget the guitar and the bass and all that stuff. Learn to read tarot cards and astrology,
Right.
because then you're talking about the person you're with, and
Right.
there's nothing more interesting to somebody than themselves. And
Right.
so I tried to get them to learn how to read tarot cards, because
Right.
it's the best way to meet people. They tell you stuff that they wouldn't tell you for 20 years.
Absolutely. So, it's a whole different thing. And a lot of the people who ran the stores, at least back in the day, they were very much enmeshed in their own. I know one of them, actually, the store owner, Crystal Rainbows. She was actually an active participant in a witch coven that was active in Long Island. So she
That's
was.
you bigger than anything, actually,
Hmm. Hmm.
right
So a
now.
lot of is it is
Oh,
it
you wouldn't believe it. You would not believe how big witchcraft is. And I don't mean
wow.
witchcraft like
Right,
putting spells and curses on people. I mean
right, right,
Wicca as a religion, which is actually quite recent. You know,
right.
everyone thinks like Wicca goes back hundreds of years, but it's gigantic.
Yep.
There's
Right.
yeah, they're selling tons of stuff.
Right, right. So we're seeing this, resurgence again. It's happening differently. You don't see the stores, the proliferation of stores anymore because
No,
of the internet. And but it's there, and there's more tools on divination. There's more training now.
you're
There's
not kidding
courses.
about that.
Right. I mean, you can just go on the internet and just list out tarot courses, and you'll see thousands upon thousands.
I know. I know. And we get people telling us all the time, your deck was the first deck I ever got. And that's what we wanted to do, was to popularize astrology
Right,
and tarot and
right,
divination in
right,
general,
right.
because it helps us in our life. We wanted to help other people.
Right, right. In fact, I think, Monte, you should start a new school called Old School Divination, like the way we learned. You had to be initiated, you had to be
Oh
brought
yeah.
in. It wasn't just, you download a bunch of PDFs and now you're a self-proclaimed expert. You had
Oh my
to
God, there's so many of those. There's
right.
but actually the New York Times had an article about like a week ago, and it said tarot is now a thing. They actually said it. Tarot is a thing now,
Is a
and
thing.
the same thing with astrology. I think tarot, because it's easier and it's
It's
not.
easier. It's a quicker learn. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean karma cards. I'm teaching a class right now with that Texas store, Soultopia, and I'm teaching people to read charts because we have to teach people to do that.
Right.
We got to teach the younger people and those that are interested how to
Right.
read. Even and I'm talking about the basics. I'm not talking about
Right.
somebody like yourself that has decades and decades of experience as an
Right.
astrologer and a horary astrologer.
Right.
Uh, but I just so they can read and get in touch with themselves, and that'll launch them on their journey. Because that's what
Right.
divination is. It's getting in touch with yourself, your higher self.
Absolutely. Right. So I wanted to actually go into that, but before we do, I think I have another slide here. And hold, no, I only had one slide. Okay, so I thought I had another slide. All right, but so since we're talking about what divination is, I wanted to give you a little
Oh,
bit of what
cool.
I think divination is based on its origins during the age of antiquity.
Wow. Love
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, and this goes back to the Hellenistic era of 223 BC to 31 BC. This is just shortly
That's Greece,
before the.
everybody. For those of you who don't know, Hellenistic is Greece, old
Right.
school.
Old
Just how,
school.
yeah, I'm because the new schools don't teach what Hellenistic is. So
They
I'm
don't
just
teach
saying.
it. And it wasn't just modern day Greece. The Hellenistic world was deeply enmeshed into Egypt, and that's where
Right.
it emerged. So that it was, think of it like Hellenistic culture during the Hellenistic era, around probably about sometime around 30 years before the birth of Christ. This is when this period and falls under. And this doctrine that emerged during the Hellenistic era is called Kartaki, the doctrine of Kartaki. It's an ancient Greek word meaning inceptions or initiatives. Inceptions or initiatives. And the practice of Kartaki was one of seeking omens of good or ill fortune to discern the initiative or enterprise which is being set forth, or to seek what is the will of the gods, right? So, according to the doctrine of Kartaki, if one is truly seeking to determine if one's will is being given consent, right, by the gods or the divine will of the gods, a question would be, for example, that a king would ask a diviner, and they weren't called astrologers or tarot readers, or they
Right,
were
right,
called
right,
diviners, right?
right.
And
Or
that's a
soothsayers.
soothsayers, right? The soothsayers or diviners, and they would ask, is, for example, the king would request from the diviner the question to know the question, is the gods willing that we should send a military mission to Sparta? right? Those are the type of questions that were being asked. So do the gods augur a plentiful harvest for the kingdom this season?
That
And
was a
now
big
if the
one.
and if the gods were willing, right, the diviner would be given a sign or a portent, and the king or the ruler of the kingdom would be filled with the authority from above. From above, he would be filled with divine authority, and his decision in proceeding going forth would be blessed. And this was the
Yeah.
core concept of katarchy, and eventually which would become modern day divination. And so it has divination has very profound spiritual foundations. And what it essentially implies is the execution or infers the execution of free will and free choice in accordance to the divine will. And that's really what it's about. And from this, we see the emergence of many different divination systems. Most importantly, at this time, is the beginning of Western, what we would call Western astrology,
Right.
the roots of Western modern astrology. Actually,
Right.
I would argue that all forms of astrology started during this era, all right, and then spread into the Middle East, into India, and certainly into Western Europe. And it starts at this time when Hipparchus, right? He was an astronomer, a theologian. He was this, he was sort of what we would call a Renaissance man. He was the one who discerns the seasons. He's the one who establishes the tropical zodiac, right? Aries, Taurus,
Right.
Gemini, etc. So it's during this era, it's the inceptional era when divination and astrology and symbolism all emerges, and that's the basis of it.
Okay. That sounds true to me.
Yeah, well, I'm just getting at is that he was also the first guy to determine uh, the beginning of the year, which start
Right.
on
The first,
spring,
first
right?
but um, according to my friend Zechariah Sitchin, and this is not my research, it's his. Uh, the 12 comes from the Sumerian gods, and according to him, they were real people. They just lived a long time, so they were the gods of your fathers because your father knew them, and they didn't age because they were from Nibiru and all that other stuff. I mean, now we start getting into the UFO phenomenon and the outer
Right.
space.
Well, I think what we see with this period is that the priory knowledge, the profound knowledge of this profound priory spiritual knowledge that was passed from Sumer to Egypt is now passed over to the Greeks, who now
Right.
systematize it, right? And according to both the astrology, the mathematics, and the astronomy. And then from there we get all this symbolism, and they use and this is also the time trigonometry emerged, and
Uh-huh.
where they were able to divide up the sky,
You mean with Pythagoras?
right, with right. And this, well, actually, yes, around the time of Pythagoras. This is also at the time of during the time of Pythagoras is they call the axial alignment. And this is the period during the axial alignment with Pythagoras or the Pythagorean school, the Western mystical mystery tradition, is the emergence of Buddha and all the various major. This is also where we see the uh, Judaic law, Moses, all emerges at the same time. All these major religions, with the exception of Christianity and Islam, which is essentially derivatives of Judaism, by the way. So
Right, no, right, because it says Abraham's father was a priest of Ur. Ur was one of the cities of Samaria. So the whole Abrahamic tradition, which is Muslims and Jews, comes
right,
from Abraham. That
right,
they both trace their lineage back there. But like the 12, uh, the symbols of the 12 were like Virgo. The Vessel Virgins didn't used to mean they didn't have sex. It meant they had sex with anybody they wanted to.
right,
So, right, because they were for a while they were temple prostitutes, but it all goes back to
right.
Ishtar or Isis or
Hmm.
whoever you want to call it, back when the Sumerian gods were on Earth or active, and
Hmm.
she did whatever she wanted. She was the only female that did whatever she wanted. She was
Right.
the daughter of the ruler,
Hmm.
of Earth. So I know, and people talk about where did astrology come from? You're talking
Right.
about where astrology came from.
Right. Yeah, well, I think it all started in Sumer, but it wasn't until the time of the late Hellenistic era that we
No, right,
see it
right.
become systematized, and then eventually it develops into a true medieval science, including
Well, also
tarot.
it's
Right.
democracy. It's
Right.
what you're talking about was the beginning of democracy. Because
Right.
when you could do a chart for someone who wasn't the ruler, you're talking about the beginnings of democracy.
And it's the emergence of collective free will, right?
Right,
So where free will, in accordance with the divine will, right, was um, was being supported here. That your will, you have a free will, but there's also divine will, right?
right,
And is your free will in accordance with the divine will, or
right.
or what the gods seek, or what the gods want?
Well, you and
So
I both know as readers that people come to us for counseling, and sometimes they don't listen. And there's a lot of stories in mythology. I mean,
right.
one of the worst things a king could do would be to go to the Delphic Oracle and not listen. And then,
Well, that's right. That's right. The
yeah,
Delphic Oracle comes out of this period, and there's a tremendous testimony, right? We have archaeological testimony of the implications of when those various generals and rulers went to the
oh,
Delphic
definitely,
Oracle and
yes,
failed to execute what was right.
right,
They went actually against the prediction, or went against the augury itself.
right.
They
And then
did just the opposite.
came back in rags begging to
Right.
be forgiven for. I mean, there's a lot of stories
Right.
of
And
that.
that's called hubris, right? When you
Right.
defy the gods,
Yeah.
hubris. Right.
Right. And
Yeah.
on at the Delphic Oracle, and it's actually symbolized on the Rider-Waite tarot deck on the High Priestess card. There's
Right.
two columns on either side of the god of the High Priestess. And there were two columns at the entrance to the Delphic Oracle. One said, "Know thyself," which is the one everybody pretty much knows. The other one said, "Nothing in excess."
Right.
And those two things were the advice to everybody coming to the Delphic Oracle.
Right. And that's the type of advice most people tend to ignore when they go to a modern day tarot reader or
Oh
astrologer.
yeah. I
Yeah.
had people today, I was reading for them, and I knew that this one person was, and they even told me, what they're going to do. It's not, and I'm like, yeah, but my psychic thing, and I'm doing a chart for like the moment you ask the question, and I'm doing all this
Right.
stuff. It all says no, my friend,
Right.
but
It all shouts no, right?
right, but it doesn't make any difference. But you're talking about free will, so who am I to say what's, come back in a year and tell me what happened,
Well,
and
yeah, I think you and I would agree that destiny is negotiable, and that's actually the
yeah,
core concept of katarchy and divination. But there are constraints with that. There is operational constraints, let's say, within that concept that destiny is negotiable, meaning there are certain things in life that you're never going to be able to do or achieve, regardless what level of education or what level of
yes,
leverage that you impose. I mean, you and I, no matter how physically gifted at our physical peaks in our late 20s, early 30s, could ever play NBA basketball, even
this
at
is
our best.
true.
You know what I'm saying? So there are constraints. I think as bright as we might think ourselves to be, we probably could not be working at CERN as physicists today, even if
No.
we started in earnest a career in physics and science and technology.
Well,
I just don't think
maybe
that
with a,
is where. Yeah.
yeah, I'd have a mop and a broom. That would be how
Right.
I'd be working at
Well,
CERN.
what I'm getting at is, like, there are constraints within that
Yeah,
concept that destiny is negotiable. The question is, within the constraints of your destiny, there is a lot of options.
yeah,
There's quite a bit of room, right? In terms of how you can execute that destiny, and to the level and quality you can execute that destiny. And I think that's another core concept that came out of this period that often gets pushed under the rug because people just want to, they just go to, well, a lot of modern day people, I can't speak for the people back then, but I'm sure it's very similar, where I want to know what's going to happen. I only want to hear what's good, and I want it to happen and happen now. And there's no there's no sense of connection with the divine, that there's a co-participatory mystique, right? That there's an interplay between what's happening your relationship with the cosmos and the relationship and the relationship of the cosmos back to you, and that there's a process of growth and development that's occurring on both ends, but there's constraints, right? There's an operating system that we are emerged in, and it's called what, the Monday, the macro, what's it called, the as above so below, in order
Well,
to
yeah.
produce the miracle of the one thing.
Well, that's Hermes trimester. I never
Try
pronounced it. Yeah,
Trimegistus.
right. That's
Right.
the Hermetic principle.
Yeah.
But the Sumerians. Once again, I'm coming back to Zechariah. I'm not a linguist. He was,
Right.
and it could speak. You could read the cuneiforms. He said that the Sumerians had a difference between destiny and fate,
Right.
and they said that a destiny was what they also called a planetary orbit. They use the same word for a
Uh-huh.
and
The root
yes,
word.
it could be changed, but you got to have like another size planet come in there
Right.
and screw with it. Yeah, it could be
Right.
changed, but it only changes like once every 100
Right. Right.
million, four
Right.
billion years. But your
Right.
fate, you can actually adjust a little bit, and that's where astrology would come in handy,
Come in. Right.
because it helps you. You're operating your chart at a certain level. You look at a chart. Oh my God, is this guy a genius or a crazy person? What
Right.
level?
Right.
What level are they operating their
Right.
chart at? And
Right.
divination, I think, is a way, and astrology readings as well, is a way of learning how to up your game. Get more in
Definitely.
touch with yourself.
Right. So, I mean, I think getting in touch with yourself and connecting with the cosmos through divination and in other means, and through omen reading, through awareness of of the intimations that we gain through synchronicity, and finding meaning, right, through serendipitous or synchronistic events, is all part of enhancing, raising consciousness. I think really what this
Yes,
all comes down to is consciousness.
definitely, definitely. And synchronicity is Carl Jung's theory of meaningful coincidence, where things that occur at the same moment have a relationship of significance, not necessarily
Right.
causality. Because sometimes people think that I think, oh my God, this caused this. No, it's like being a Native American and going out and looking at the birds
Right.
fly by,
Right.
or the
Right.
clouds and the leaves,
Right.
and being able to
Right. Right.
attach that, like
Right.
the quantum field, and be able to read it.
Right.
That's
Right.
divination.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's almost, I'm sure you've had clients come up to you and say, it's your fault that relationship didn't work because you told me she was going to betray me. And if you didn't say that, she would have never done it. Right. It's like, so,
Yep.
you were just reading, you were being, you were divining, you were the auguries through your divination was indicating that this relationship was not in accordance to the divine will or to the divine destiny or to the one's destiny,
Right.
right?
And
And
auguries used to be with reading the entrails of animals.
right.
That's
Well,
that's where that word comes from.
right, and that's really the core of how Kartaki. So it was the entrails of animals, and it was omen reading, like
Yeah, the
reading the
birds.
clouds, the birds, the sky,
Yeah,
right? Things that would also things that would happen at night. Like if you heard a loud sound in the middle of the night, that
that one
shook
I never
everyone.
heard. That's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, that's part of omen reading. Yeah,
Huh.
yeah. So a diviner was very much aware and of what was happening at night, because that
I
would
think
be much more telling in many ways.
that's interesting. That I've never heard that one before. I've
Hmm.
in West Eastern Europe they read beans. I don't know if you've ever seen that. Well, they'll read like white beans, and I think they
Hmm.
mix like some others in there. Um, the word temple itself, speaking about augury, like when I wrote karma, excuse me, the I've written too many books, I don't even remember which. Quantum affirmations is my theory about how we affect our reality,
Right,
and I invented a word called quantumplation, where you do a quantum visualization. And I looked up the origin of the word contemplation, and
right,
TEMP is also from temple, and it has
right,
to do with where they did an augury and where they looked through the window and watched the birds fly by. I mean, the word temple comes from that, from making auguries.
right. From birds or
Yeah,
from
from
right, from birds.
entrails. I mean, they used to cut animals up and
Right.
read. I mean, and so we're trying to eliminate the middle augury person, and so they can read for themselves. But that wasn't a concept until like
Right.
in tarot reading for yourself. That was Mary
That wasn't
Greer.
really until the postmodern era.
Yeah, she said Mary Greer wrote Tarot for Yourself, and then that was in 1980, I think.
Well,
And then
that's the
we came,
postmodern era, right?
no, exactly. And then we came along in 1990 with the Enchanted Tarot, which is
Right.
designed for you to read for yourself. But
Right.
until then, the whole thing was, go to the tarot reader and get
Right.
a reading.
Right. Exactly. It wasn't just it was a process, right?
Yeah,
It was going to someone who's it's almost like going to a priest, right?
yeah,
Or a priestess and seeking counsel, right? And
yeah,
that priestess or priest would be your confessor. It's a term that goes back to medieval Europe. Someone you could confide private information, even potentially dangerous information that could get you in trouble, at least, right?
yeah.
In
Okay,
society,
yeah, I'll get you
right?
killed.
Right. And so you could go and then get from that seeking advice and counsel combined with divination, you can then make an informed decision that would shape and affect your destiny.
Yeah, and the confession, the sanctity of the confession is I think what kept religion going, because
Absolutely.
they actually supposedly did not rat on you, you know.
Exactly.
And as
Absolutely.
God said, nobody loves a rat.
Nobody loves a rap. I love it. So I wanted to, now that we got the divination set, let's talk about how the Celtic Harvest Festival of Samhain, right, in Ireland, that eventually be what we know today as Halloween, emerged because it is during this period. If you go back thousands of years, especially in medieval Europe, but all throughout all of the continents, it seems around this period, September, October, November, is when divination really takes prominence.
Yeah, because it's the harvest and death. All the plants have died, the trees are dying, and they're going to come back in the spring, or at least you hope they are. And
Right.
so the concept of resurrection, the
Death and
Plutonian concept,
resurrection. Right.
death and
Death and
resurrection,
resurrection. Yeah.
it's and the plants die so that you can live.
hmm
That's very very Christian. That's very, Jesus
Absolutely.
died so you can live. Yeah,
Actually,
so
it goes all the way back to Egypt, right? The
yeah,
death and resurrection of
yeah,
uh what was the
Osiris.
Osiris, there we go.
Yeah,
Osiris, right?
yeah.
And there's
I'm
also the
smarter than
death
I
and
look.
resurrection of the god of wine, the god of redemption.
Bacchus.
Not
Oh, that's
Bacchus.
the
You
god, the Egyptian god of wine. I
no
don't
no
think
no
I
no no
know
no
him.
no no. No, you know who it is. I'm not going to give you the name. You
Okay,
know who it is. It starts with a D.
Dionysus.
There you go, Dionysus. So
Okay,
if you just read the text of Dionysus, or just it almost sounds exactly like Jesus Christ. He's not married, right?
wow,
He has followers. He also has
right,
women followers, right? He
yeah.
drinks the wine. He serves the wine. It's right. This is the blood of right, the blood of the gods, right? The blood of Christ. So there, you can see here very similar, a lot of similarities.
Oh
And
yeah,
so,
there's a lot of people who think Jesus didn't exist, and that all that is
mhm,
from Dionysus and other people. I don't claim to know whether that's
right,
true or not, of
right,
course.
right,
But
right.
and there's so many stories of people being nailed to a cross or nailed to a
Right.
tree.
Well, that was a classic. The crucifixion was being employed hundreds of years. I don't know about thousands, but certainly hundreds of years prior to Christ and hundreds of years after the death of Christ.
Yeah, well,
So
probably the minute they invented nails, there you go.
there you go. So yeah. So going back to Halloween, a lot of people don't know even what Halloween is. I felt like it's really important for us to focus on that, and then we can
Yeah.
get deeper into modern day Halloween and talk a little bit more about what it means, particularly now for us. But it started like what we know as Halloween started off as a Gaelic festival, Samhain, and it's uh, it's it was the first and most important of the four quarter days in a medieval Gaelic calendar. that actually was celebrated. It was a festival, not a day, a festival that started on October 31st through November 1st. So it was like a 2-day festival, and it was celebrated in Ireland, Scotland, the Isle of Man, uh, some parts of England. And it marked the beginning, as you stated earlier, right? The end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter, or the dark half of the year.
Right.
And like Beltane in May 1st, right? It
The
was seen
fire.
as a liminal. It's a liminal time. It's a liminal time when the boundary between the world and the other world, or the other side, thinned. It thinned, and that meant that the spirits and the fairies and all entities could more easily come into our world and be seen, and were particularly active. So it wasn't just like you could do a séance and get a very active,
Right, right, right.
you get a very informative séance, a good time to do a séance. So that's an upside to it. But these beings, right, from the other realm, and from the other side, and from other realms and other dimensions, would become active at this time. And there's, quite a bit in the tradition about this, and that it was believed that these spirits and fairies needed to be propitiated, like they needed to be
Yeah.
recognized, served, offered wine, offered certain libations to ensure that the people and their livestock would survive the winter. So um, there's a potential of an existential threat, because many families and people for thousands upon thousands of years did not all survive winter,
Oh, that's for sure. Oh,
right?
yeah.
So they would offer these spirits, right? These fairies and ancestors. This is a time a dead parent or grandfather, or some or ancestor, you were able then communicate and to propitiate by offering food, drink, portions of the crop, anything. They would all do sorts of things. They would make certain, and part of the festival, right, was to not only to drink and be merry, which sort of came with it all, but was actually to make that food and drink, that, and a certain portion would be left to those spirits,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So,
and the Druids were super connected to the earth. Um, that's one of the
mhm,
reasons it's so popular now. A lot of people think Halloween is the most popular holiday now because we're so disconnected from connection to growing things and spirituality and life and death and Day of the Dead. But the Druids' alphabet was based on trees. Like
right,
our word for holy comes from the holly tree because the holly tree's roots go the deepest,
right,
and
exactly.
they considered it the holy tree.
Right. And so these festivals, right, included all these rituals and games
Yeah.
intended to not only connect with the souls of the dead, or the spirits and fairies, right, but also this was a period uh, that where one could these games and rituals where one could discern the future, especially regarding
Yes.
death and marriage.
Yeah.
So a lot of people at this time would seek divination, whole communities in celebration,
Oh
right?
yeah. Oh
Right,
yeah.
while they're drinking and being merry and doing all sorts of fun stuff, right? They would also then do apple bobbing, nut roasting, scrying, mirror gazing,
Yes.
uh, egg whites. They're pouring egg whites into water. They're doing what we call scrying, dream interpretation. Special bonfires were lit where there were rituals involving them, and these bonfires were part of the divination
Yeah.
and engagement with spirits. Like there was some connection with the fire, the bonfire, and the actual spirits that would converge around the fire during the festival activity, where people then could connect. And so this is not like a simple thing that we've reduced it to some commercial holiday
No.
today.
Oh no.
This was going on for thousands of years, right?
Thousands of years. And when a seer would come through, it was a big deal. And if they had a seer at one of their festivals, that was
Right,
considered a big deal. And God forbid you did anything bad to a seer,
right,
the whole
exactly.
town would take you out.
Right. And here's the other thing too, the concept of evil or the devil really comes up very strongly. And one of the reasons
Yes.
even the spirits of the good and the pure and ancestors from the other side would all emerge and converge and participate, and you would be able to discern your future, right? Uh, however, the catch is that the devil, right? The devil would be close by, and they would
Oh
have these
yeah,
fires lit because the
yes,
devil would also be able to sneak his way through and be
yes,
able to pull his tricks, trick or treat, see, to pull his
exactly,
tricks, all right?
right.
And so they would light these fires, uh, and these fires serve to keep away the devil. And this is this whole concept of horror and evil, because those concepts which we now project onto Hollywood and go to well, we don't even go to movies anymore, but back in the day, all of
Right.
that's been commercialized. But back then, those things were very real, very
Oh yeah,
real.
and when they would do an augury, um, like even you know, we're not talking about cultures in other. We're talking about like Brussels, France, England. You know, play Saxony, Germany. So much comes
Medieval
out of
Europe.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so when they would unfortunately like kill a rooster, the first thing they would do before they would do that, I know
Right.
it's horrible,
Right.
um, is they would take a drink of some alcoholic beverage and spit it into the fire and
Right.
say the first sip is for the devil.
Right.
I mean that's like a Belgian tradition,
Right.
and then the rest of it is for everybody. Then the guy would read the entrails of the poor rooster. Um, but the concept of the devil was right there
Right.
with him
Right. And that things could go horribly wrong. The word
because they
goblin,
did
the
all the time.
goblins, right? All
Yeah.
of those, right? Let's think about these negative spirits, goblins. For some,
Well, the people were so evil. There were a lot of evil, cruel people, and they
right.
used the devil as cover. You know,
Well,
the
no,
devil
yeah,
did
right.
this.
And certainly the Catholic Church used that to its advantage in the Reformation, right?
And the governments, the
Right.
governments, there used to be droit de seigneur during the
Right.
Middle Time, where
Right.
the
Right.
baron or whoever
Right.
could have the first night with someone who married on his land. I mean, it was a dark age, was really dark.
Right, right. But what's interesting is that there's a recognition, there's a festival for the dead, there's a festival for
Yes,
magic, there's a festival for dealing with this liminal period, right? The boundary between the world and the other world. This is an interesting, and it's also connected with the harvest season or the end of the
yeah,
harvest season,
yeah,
and that period of winter that was they were transitioning to was a period of great uncertainty,
yeah. You could die of starvation.
die of starvation, right? And disease and all sorts of
Yeah.
things that happen. So happened during that period. So
I mean,
anyway,
think of the sign Pisces. The sign Pisces occurs at the end of the winter
right,
when there's probably not very much food, so you have to sacrifice. The strong have to eat less so that
right,
the weak can
right,
live. I mean, there's a
right,
symbolism. Is not.
right,
There's a
right,
sense to it.
right. So but this the need, there was actually a need for divination, right?
Oh
Because
yeah, they were
right, there was a
scared.
need to know, am I going to be okay?
Yeah,
Right, or is the harvest, all right, our portion of the harvest going to be last us long enough until the spring? And
right.
so so the issue with death. Now, what's interesting is plagues started during these periods. If there was going to
Yeah,
be a plague or epidemic, right? If
yeah,
you look back historically in 1347, 1348, I believe it was September, October, and we don't have the exact date, but it's around October when the bubonic plagues began at the time of Halloween. Sound familiar with what's happening now?
yeah. The second wave.
Right, the second wave, which is actually shutting Europe down as we speak. I'm just hearing more and more events. It's actually almost sounding as worse, actually worse than the first one.
Yeah, England too.
England too, and so there's massive shutdowns that hasn't hit here. Probably happen right after the election at this rate. But I'm just if you can keep that in mind, there was no quarantines as we understood it. There's no understanding of modern medicine,
No.
so there was a need for divination. Will I be okay? Will I be afflicted by the plague? Will our food stores last? Right? These are all big things, and this is the sort of the shadow element of, let's say, the shadow side of the festival, that
Yeah.
this might be the last time we could all dance and be merry together and have
And
plenty
because
of
there was a
food.
lot of food. you know, because
Right.
they're celebrating the harvest.
Right.
And they, you know, if you didn't have, you
Right.
were screwed.
You were screwed because everything shut down, right?
Yeah,
Everything shut down
yep,
for like what? Nearly how many months? It almost feels like 6 months, but
right.
right until March at least, and it's still cold in March,
Yeah.
right?
And
So we're
plus they had
talking,
bandits. They had
right,
bandits. They
right,
had, you know, the nobility, that they had rangers who would come through and just take shit from people. And
right,
I,
right, right. So I wanted to go since we got. That's a good point because we have the first Halloween. I have the chart of the first Halloween.
you're amazing.
Well, it's part of my mundane astrology tradition here. It for everyone out there. It's on May 13th, 609 A.D. Pope Boniface IV dedicated the Pantheon in Rome in honor of all Christian martyrs, and the Catholic feast of All Martyrs' Day was established in the Western Church on this day. So the first, right? So what they ended up doing, that was May 13th. And then what they did is they moved this observance to May 13th, from May 13th to November 1st, 835 AD. So 609, right? They make the
Oh,
dedication, they make the connection, and then in 835, November 1st, or actually All Hallows Eve,
wow.
when the sun sets on October 31st, on no right was the beginning, was actually, and I have it here. The
I'm looking
chart
at it.
is actually set. Yeah, I could probably make it larger here. Okay, here
Oh,
we
that's
go.
better.
So you could see October 31st, 835 AD, 4:47 p.m. in Rome, Italy. That's actually, so Halloween, the traditional Halloween, is a Roman slash Catholic slash Celtic
Wow.
holiday
Wow.
that started on sunset and would last through on sunset on October 31st and would last through the 1st of November.
And
And
look at
so,
that Pluto-Uranus conjunction. Wasn't that like in the
yep.
60s?
Yeah, and yeah, the Uranus Pluto conjunction has to do with social transformations, like we
Right.
saw in the 60s, right? Where
Right.
Halloween really became a really big event in the 60s
It
because
really did. Yeah.
yeah, and you know more about that than I do because I was just getting started in the
I
mid
don't
60s.
remember, but
You don't remember?
yeah, I sort of think you're right. But I know the Pluto-Uranus conjunction is the 60s.
Absolutely. So we had a Uranus Pluto conjunction at the time of the first Hallows Eve on Halloween, October 31st, 835.
And I
And
think it
so,
was in Virgo, right? The one during the 60s. So it's opposite this particular conjunction. I think it was in
yeah.
Virgo.
So it was in Virgo, exactly opposite. You are correct.
Yeah.
You are correct. And I think around that time we saw a proliferation of Halloween movies. We saw
Yeah.
Halloween TV special. We
Yeah.
saw Charlie Brown's Halloween.
I
We
was just
saw
going to say the Great
right.
Pumpkin.
Right, right. So there's all these Halloween specials we grew up with as kids that start during that Uranus Pluto conjunction in the 60s.
That's so wild.
That was setting off, that was hitting this chart, right?
Wow.
Of the first
Yeah.
Halloween. The first Halloween.
It's really pretty damn opposite.
Right. And it's interesting, you've got this moon Jupiter
North
conjunction,
Node.
which is very festive, right? It's a festival, right? It's an
Yeah.
Aquarius, right? And then you have I mean, obviously the sun in Scorpio, right? That's the issue of death and rebirth, and the issue of
Right.
all that very strong scorpionic theme, right? The Feast of the Dead. It's actually All Hallows Eve is the Feast of the Dead, and they actually had certain traditions that emanated from this period. Certainly by the end of the 12th century, which was the 1100s, and they would have like this event where people would go door to door. Excuse me, they would go door to door on All Hallows Day or All Hallows Eve, and they would sort of like what we see Christmas caroling, but it was Halloween caroling, and they were
Wow.
dressed in black, right? They were dressed in black and they paraded the streets and they were ringing bells of a mournful sound and calling on all good Christians to remember poor souls or to remember the dead. And these good Christians, right, would then, in return would soul them. Souling was a custom of baking and sharing a soul cake, all right, for all poor Christian souls. And this was the origin of trick or treating. Trick or
Huh.
treating. Yeah. So people would knock door to door, put on a good song and dance, all right? They would sing. Here's an example of a song: a soul, a soul, a soul cake. Please, good missus, a soul cake, an apple, a pear, a plum, or a cherry. Any good thing to make us all merry. One for Peter, two for Paul, three for him who made us all. So it has some religious connotation to it, and they would
Yeah.
put on this, they would do this, and then the the good Christian would then give them a soul cake, and so this was known as souling, that would eventually become trick or treating.
That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Well done.
Yeah. So no, this is just interesting because you could see. I'm just looking at here, right? I'm just looking at the symbolism here, and I'm thinking, okay, what is that? I mean, I know the moon has to do with treats or like food, right? I'm thinking of
Yeah.
food, right? And people would petition and put on parades and shows to be fed, to be fed,
Right.
these soul cakes. And actually, they have the ingredients of a soul cake, and soul cakes would still be given out all the way into the early 20th century up to World War
Wow.
One. People were souling. Yeah, they were doing souling in many parts of Europe and in the United States as well. So it's not
Huh.
it's yeah. So it didn't really die out. And so today, and even Shakespeare mentioned souling in his comedy The Two Gentlemen of Verona,
Huh.
right? And he goes into it. So it's something that was a lot more common than we are aware of today. And then what's really interesting is Halloween sort of dies out between World War One. By the time World War One comes around, and well, actually, let me go back a bit. So Halloween is sort of like gets its first injection, right? Before it's like an event that is not really practiced in the United States until when? 1849,
Right.
1849 to 1892. And what's that? That's the spiritual moment, the spiritualist moment. So that's the spiritualist era. And that's when in the 1840s, right, we saw, in the burned over district in upstate New York, right? This is an area where
What, patience matter? I'm trying to think of
This
what
has
that
to do with
woman's
the
name.
Fox sisters on November
Okay.
14th. I'm going to show you the chart in a moment, but on November 14th, the Fox sisters in upstate New York demonstrated their spiritualist wrappings in this Corinthian hall in Rochester, New York. And this was the first demonstration of spiritualism held before a paying public and inaugurated a long history of events that featured spiritualists, mediums, all throughout the country. And this became big. So it was a period from 1849 to 1892. But when October into November came around, this is when the spiritualists all started cashing in really, really big. And
Yeah,
so
because a lot of people, especially when there would be a war, spiritualism would get even more of a bump because people would want to contact these young men who had died. Um,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely, and that's the interesting thing. I'm going to get to that when we get to World War One or right
sure.
after World War One. But I wanted to look at this. Wanted you to take a look at this chart. This is the event that started the spiritualist movement in the United States, mediumship, where scientists were now doing very serious investigation into mediumship, and this starts
And
shortly.
There's Pluto and Uranus again.
There you go, Pluto and Uranus again. You've got this new moon. Exactly. And this is the exact time. I actually got this right out of the newspaper.
Wow.
The ad for, it's just the exact time, 6:30
Wow,
p.m.
Neptune
at the
and
new
Pisces.
moon. Right. Neptune Pisces. You got the new moon in Scorpio, right? Neptune and Pisces up here on the midheaven. Look at that. Right on the midheaven. Divination goes commercial.
Wow, love it.
Right. And
I
so
love
this is all connected to the Halloween. So the Halloween in terms of connecting mediumship, right? And the Gaelic tradition or agricultural tradition from Europe that's now right being migrated over to North America. This is sort of the merger of mediumship as we understand it today. Not so much divination, but mediumship,
it.
right,
Yes.
is now being merged with Halloween. So Halloween's evolving now.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if you could put up that picture of our stuff again because we actually reinvented the Ouija board. See
This
where it
one
says
here?
the psychic circle? Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Because
Yes.
talking boards actually, there's supposedly Pythagoras had a talking wheel,
Right.
and where he was able to do it. So the talking boards and and the Ouija, we found a Ouija board, and Amy was able to do it by ourselves. And one day it hovered over. This is in the 70s, way
Right.
before we were publishers
Right.
and authors. And we got she got a message. It started going over the Ouija board where it says at the top, copyright William Fuld,
Mm-hmm.
and it's
Yes.
it's spelled out. I am Van Fuld, William's brother, and and he ripped me off. And I have some. We have the notes in
Go on.
handwritten notes.
I believe it. Go on.
And he says, I have something for you, the psychic circle. Everything is a circle. He described the size of it, which was a big issue. You know, the
Right.
size of how the board was going to be, and about how life is a circle and a spiral.
Right.
And we one day we invented the psychic circle. It's been in print since 91, 92. And we
Right.
sold, lots of them. And now it says Ouija board / psychic circle on the divination kind of websites.
Mm-hmm.
So, but people have a tendency to look at the Ouija board as something that's weird. But then you have people like the guy who wrote The Changing Light at Sandover, which won every book award you could win. It was written with a Ouija board.
Right. Right. There's a number of books, major tour de force
Yeah,
literary publications that were all written by a Ouija board.
yeah, and so the spiritualist movement, places like Casadega and there's like communities of spiritualists now.
Absolutely.
I think this would make a great book. I think you'd do a great book on this, William. I'm
Well,
serious.
this is coming from my Halloween seance. I actually was the medium for everybody in the group. And then I was being a medium for Nostradamus and a number of other famous people. And many of those, it was all recorded, and many of those mediumship channel proclamations and predictions came true. And so
Wow.
people are always asking me to do it again, but it takes a lot of energy out of me. So what I did is I gave a presentation on this, a more in-depth presentation than what we're doing now, and then went into the mediumship because I wanted to explain that mediumship. This is the period where mediumship is it's easiest to connect with people on the other side because the
Right.
veil has thinned, and that's something I think today most people, uh, between the divination and mediumship is really secondary or tertiary to the commercial aspects of the
Sure.
Halloween.
Well, yeah, because people can make a Ouija board themselves. You don't have to buy a Ouija board or buy our thing or anything. And
Right,
in China, they do it with a chopstick through a basket, a little basket, and they put rice. And they do this, and it makes one character. And
right,
then they read that one character. But every culture, once again, has a tradition of talking boards, which is
right. Absolutely. And these talking boards were very big during the 1860s, during the Civil
yeah,
War,
yeah,
and especially into the First World War. And mediums were very active and very in demand. And again, the Halloween period was the period when, it was sort of like Christmas for for the New Age movement, right? They didn't
yeah,
call it New Age until the 60s, but for people who practice what they would call spiritualism, and the basic precepts of spiritualism, there's a God, there's a supreme intelligence, there are spirits who come from divine source. There are natural methods of this perfection process of reincarnation where souls are perfected, right? And their souls face countless different situations and problems and obstacles and have to learn how to deal with them. And as part of this cosmological scheme, souls can naturally communicate with other living people as well as interfere with their lives. And there are many planets in the universe that are inhabited by souls who are living, who are having who are having an experience. So like we happen to be living on Earth. We are souls that are living on Earth and having a human experience, right? Where
Right.
another soul would be living on another planet and having what we would call an extraterrestrial experience.
Right, and Edgar Casey was big on that. Like you'd go to Venus to learn about love, you go to Saturn to learn about discipline.
Right,
as an entity.
right,
That was actually somebody who Amy was able to contact, and she didn't know anything about Edgar Casey, but he loomed big in my mythology. And when she got that Ouija board, it was except going KC, KC, the
right,
letters K,
right.
and then we got all kinds of stuff. And it turns out his chart is kind of similar to mine, so that's kind of fun. His,
Interesting.
yeah, his astrology chart.
Yeah, I was hired to rectify. I was actually sponsored. That's the correct word. To rectify Case's chart, and I have it on my blog. And I got all his biographical data with. It's the probably the most comprehensive. I think I have over 20 uh, specific dates. Oh, well over 20. Was
Well,
able to
there's
rectify
another
his
book.
chart. Yeah.
There's another book, because the Association for Research and Enlightenment they're all over the world.
Yeah.
That's and
Yeah.
and
Well,
their book.
that's who sponsored ARE sponsored that rectification because uh, Edgar Casey had his birth record with a time on it. And then later on, when ARE formed, some astrologer, I don't know, I don't remember the name, came out who was very popular at the time and said Edgar Casey was born at 3:30, right? Which is very different than the time that Casey referenced from his birth record, which has since been lost. So there was a debate. When was he really born? Was he born around the time of 1:30 that he states, or closer to 1:30, all right? Or was he born at 3:30? I think it was like 3:30, and it was very clear on the rectification. He was born between 1 and 1:30.
Wow.
Very clear. And we actually pinned the time using the software technology that we can employ today. So
Oh.
that's very easy to prove out.
So
And
maybe I don't have a chart like his.
well, we'll have to look. We'll have to look. We'll do another show on that.
Oh yeah.
Casey, Monte, and
And
channeling. How's that?
yeah,
That's another
well, yes.
show. Right?
Yeah,
Um,
you're definitely a multi-medium.
well, I try to do my best, but yeah, maybe we could do a little bit of mediumship too with Casey and see what he has to say about what's coming next in
Well, we got to get
2021.
Amy on that one.
Yeah, we'll get Amy, and I do quite a bit of mediumship. I was doing that for a long time, but again, my focus is elsewhere. But I think I could for that one. I could probably see what I can pull off
That's
here.
awesome. That's awesome.
Hmm.
Well, and just in case people want to know, if Mount Pele goes, and then Vesuvius goes, get out of the West Coast.
Get out of the West Coast. And by the way, talking about seances and mediumship, which is really Abraham Lincoln, right? Is he's it's a we have records, and it's believed that he attended only two of the seances his wife held in the White House, and in that seance foresaw his own death more than once, including in a dream he had shortly before he died, right
I
before he
think
was
people who
killed.
are in a heightened state like that do understand that and do see it coming. I was friendly with a tarot reader psychic in New York City who I probably shouldn't mention his name, but he was Yoko Ono's psychic. He had a hotline phone right that just went right to her.
Right,
And
yeah.
I asked him, I said, "Did you ever read for John Lennon?" He said, "Yes, I did." And he said he saw himself drowning in blood.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, it's it's pretty interesting, and
Well,
then
you were saying yesterday about what a heightened
Mhm.
soul John Lennon was. So it's not surprising that he was able to see something like that. It's
Right,
very Christ-like.
very Christ-like. He was like a collective sacrifice, a sacrificial
Yes.
lamb, right, on some level, and the
And
same
killed
thing
by
with
a fan.
Lincoln,
Killed
right?
by a fan.
Well, I think that was a deep state setup. I think that
Well, it's
fan,
possible.
right? Yeah, yeah. Well, that's what I believe. But
No, no, it's totally possible.
we ought to see. The thing is that I don't like saying, oh, I'm talking, but it'd be interesting if we could pull Lennon in, and if you'd be willing to talk about that and say what was really behind your death, because there is a lot of compelling evidence now that this was just not a crazy fan who shot you, and there's reasons for this, and that goes beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. But since
Sure.
we're touching on it, something that we could do a little bit more investigation on, and see if we can get to pull him in and see what he has to say about it. And maybe there
Wow.
is, yeah. I mean, again, you know, inquiring minds want to know.
Well, this is true, but now we're talking about that's it would be a really amazing show. That should be on network television.
Network television won't have that on. Okay, that's
Not
too
today.
cringe. Not
Not
today.
today.
Not these days. Not with the truth embargo in place. But
Wait a minute. So is that who is that? The Hollywood Mountain
yeah.
Seance
Well, at the
or
same time,
Houdini?
right. So
Houdini.
after so World War One comes along, Halloween gets squashed. Divination is still going on, mediumship's going on because of the soldiers, many of the soldiers who were lost, right?
And also because of the Spanish flu.
Spanish flu. But then what we see around 27, at the height of the roaring 20s into the early depression, we see this emergence of a massive interest again in seance and Halloween.
Yeah, to
And
get contact the
Halloween,
dead.
right. So yeah, and this is all has to do with the peak stardom of Harry Houdini, one of the
Yeah,
world's great, probably the world's greatest stage magician and sensation escape artist of the
yeah,
20th century, right? So he died, by the way, on October 31st, 1926.
really.
At the age of 52 from a ruptured appendix.
Right, because
And
he dared someone to punch him.
right. And he wasn't ready for it.
Right.
If he was ready for it, he'd be fine. So his wife on a radio show, the biggest radio show in New York City at the time, his wife Bess held an annual Halloween seance for 10 years in an attempt. She got the best seance people, the best mediumships to break through into the spirit world. And prior to Houdini's death, he provided his wife a code, a secret code, and in this secret code, if the medium, if the séance was able to produce what was in the code, then she would know whatever was being stated was true, right?
Right.
So that was a really big thing. And this is again where we see Halloween really is starting to take off. And the first Halloween ball is held in the Waldorf Astoria in 1927. 1927 to 28. I don't have but I know I believe it's 1927, the Halloween ball. So now Halloween really becomes a real holiday at this point, and really starts gaining traction in the public, especially in New York, where it starts spreading throughout the rest of the country. And again, these seances were not only being held, in the Knickerbocker, there was other seances that were being held throughout the country. The Knickerbocker Hotel in Los Angeles and a number of other these radio shows would sponsor these seances. Now, that could you imagine if a major radio show today like WABC sponsored a seance on Halloween? That's just
Well, they
unthinkable.
should. They should.
They should, right?
Or at least coast to coast, which you're on a lot.
Well, now Coast to Coast has changed. I mean, I still love the show, but since Art Bell's passing, it's become more of a rated PG-13 show, right?
You're kidding.
Well, they're doing the best they can do, but they have a lot of pressure now by the sponsors, and Art
Ah,
Bell is no longer at the helm. And Art Bell Art Bell had the prowess and the means to create an audience where the sponsors didn't have as much leverage as they do
I
today,
see.
right? And did you know Mitt Romney, by the way, happens to be one of the owners of Coast to Coast, the parent company of Coast to Coast? That's another interesting thing I found out, and that's part of the reason why you don't see them. I mean, they do come out with very provocative, controversial things, but again, a lot of it's been toned down. Um, Especially when it comes to the supernatural stuff, doing seances, doing Ouija boards
Really?
on live radio. Yeah, a lot of that's been. I mean, it's been actually eliminated, and you know, I mean, but that's been happening a lot. In fact, one of my qualms with the New Age movement is it's gotten all rainbows and unicorns. the side to it, or I would call the shadow side to it, or the scorpionic side to it, however you want to term it, has been sort of stripped out over the years from this holiday, from this
Well, they
period.
don't want to think about death. I mean, you can't have a one-sided attitude towards, if you really want to explore consciousness, you have to understand you're going to die. And
Right,
I think that that's why it got too much rainbows and unicorns. But you know the old Buddhist thing about the Zen Buddhist koan about what's the sound of one hand clapping? And the answer is, which is to wake you up. That's what
right,
it's really, that's the sound of one hand clapping, which is to stop your crap and to not acknowledge your death is it just negates everything you're not you, but it negates what a person is saying, even though they might be very accurate about the rainbows and unicorns. And I joke
right,
around about that a lot, but
right.
I'm very aware that there's a shadow side, and that death is you live with death every moment.
Absolutely. And what's also interesting about this period too, talking about death and resurrection, is what do we see emerge and becomes very big between this 2736 is Frankenstein, right?
Yeah.
So actually Frankenstein is released, right? Frankenstein is released around the time of Halloween during this period, and we see, the excuse me, the works, these gothic horror literature novels such as Dracula, Frankenstein, they become Hollywood classic horror films, along with The
Right.
Mummy,
And
along with
wasn't Pluto discovered in 1935?
1930.
1930. So it's that same, it's the rise of the dictators. It was a very frightening time.
Right. But like what's interesting is that, like we consider Frankenstein sort of, commercialized, sort of a comical character out of
Oh
the TV
no.
series The Monsters. However, when you watch that film today,
Oh,
even
it's
today,
scary
very scary, very provocative,
and very possible.
very possible, right? That's what makes it real, right? And
Yeah.
so you saw this issue of this Halloween imagery, I should say, including
Yeah.
death, evil, monsters, life, death, resurrection, right?
Right.
Frankenstein's resurrected, uh, and then the Dracula has very powerful themes as well. So we see that emerge as well.
And science was emerging too, because
Yeah,
you had
right.
you had the quantum physicists, you had Einstein, you had all the stuff that was coming out. People were sort of worshiping science, but at the same time terrified by it.
Right. I mean, Frankenstein is, I think it's called modern Prometheus, right?
Wow.
Where man can become God because, right, like he's got the power of God. He
Right. To
stole,
make life.
right, to make life and to resurrect life and to make us live eternally. To defy the
Right.
gods is to have eternal life, right?
Yeah.
Physical, mortal life, right? So
Right.
so again, all of these themes become part of this culture as Halloween evolves. It's right. So now you've got the divination, you got the mediumship, you've got the aspect of good and evil, you've got this like horror goes commercial. Horror is not something like, you read it back in some dusty book. It's something now that is like in your face. It's become hot, as they say. It's become
Oh
it's
yeah.
become the next big thing, and
Right.
it starts shaping our culture at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and you had actors like Boris Karloff who were just amazing, and Bela Lugosi. These people that were just they
Right,
talk about inhabit a character. They really did.
right, absolutely.
And there you
So,
are. And then you're talking about the most spiritual statement from the most spiritual person, Albert Einstein.
right, you want me to read it?
Well, sure.
Okay. So, quote, this is from Einstein, The World as I See It. He published this in 1949. Quote, the most beautiful and deepest experience a man can have is the sense of the mysterious. It is the underlying principle of religion as well as all serious endeavor in art and science. He who never had this experience seems to me, if not dead, then at least blind, to sense that behind anything that can be experienced, there is a something that our mind cannot grasp and whose beauty and sublimity reaches us only indirectly and as a feeble reflection. This is religiousness. In this sense, I am religious. To me, it suffices to wonder at these secrets and to attempt humbly to grasp with my mind a mere image of the lofty structure of all that there is.
Now that is religion.
Yeah, that is true religion. That's true spiritual.
Yeah, because
Cosmology.
his theory of general relativity, everything is energy. I
That's
mean,
right.
that talk about a 1960s New Age rainbows and unicorn statement, and out
Right.
of that, everything is energy comes the nuclear bomb.
Right. Right. That's right.
I,
Right.
I
So
mean,
there's
can you
there's a
imagine what it did to him? He must have felt so terrible about
right.
the,
Well,
the
there was
nuclear.
other things that the nuclear era has enabled us to do.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
right. That's actually powered our society in so many ways. And I mean, right. So nuclear power, nuclear fission, and now we're transitioning to nuclear fusion.
I hope so.
Well, the United States was supposed to achieve nuclear fusion by 2000, and then 10 years, about 8 years prior, the U.S. government stopped funding it. I believe the U.S. government continued to fund it, but it went black.
I
And the
see.
United States, deep state, right, and secret space program, secret military has nuclear fusion systems, nuclear fusion reactors, nuclear fusion engines. I believe that has been achieved, or we have the first generation at this point.
You
But
mean
as
like cold? You mean like cold fusion?
No, not cold fusion, nuclear fusion.
Okay.
It is what powers all the stars.
No, no, I understand what fusion is. It's just that when you're talking about fusion powering different little objects as opposed to a big fusion reactor that could power. I mean, if fusion existed, we wouldn't need fossil fuels at all.
Well,
It
that's
would
right,
it would be like what's behind me. It would be like Atlantis.
right,
This is and
exactly.
with the capstone where supposedly the
Yeah,
energy was sent out.
right. So the United States was supposed to achieve this in 2000 and then stop the research. There's tremendous evidence now. Whistleblowers are saying this was achieved. This was achieved. The United States is not sharing it. Not so much the United States, the deep state, right? The deep state. Now, when people say there's no deep state, well, then I have to ask, what's happening right now with the media?
Oh, there
With this,
definitely is a deep state.
right,
There is. I mean,
right.
you got to assume there's a deep state. I,
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the big problems with, we're talking about Halloween and we're talking about the shadow elements of culture and society, life, death, and the fact that evil is real and exists,
yeah.
right? I mean, that's part of what the Halloween tradition is. People created bonfires, the traditions to keep evil away, to keep the devil at bay. Well, we're seeing now this sense of this out of control, deep state or cabal. Something is is really now threatening our freedom of speech, our freedom
Yes.
of independent thinking. And I think this is very appropriate with what we're seeing now with this election.
Oh yeah, and the thing that terrifies them the most probably is what we're doing right now, which is all these podcasts and people like Rogan and all these other people that they can't censor things the way they used to. So they're basically just saying, "Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes?" Like the old joke.
Right, right,
They're just trying to have a wall for people who only watch the CBS Evening News or the ABC News or CNN. But then you have things like the other night, Tucker Carlson had that guy Bobolinsky on. It got 7.5 million people to watch it. It beat the CBS Evening News. Demographically, it really beat them. But
right.
but so the deep state, they can try and censor information as much as they want, but with the internet and podcasts and things like what we're doing, they really can't stop the free flow of information. It's like Bitcoin. I mean,
Right.
this is the blockchain. This is the visual blockchain.
Absolutely. I mean, when people say there's no deep state, it's interesting that you saw with the Silicon Valley thought police, such as Twitter and Facebook, right, where they took down the New York Post account. They
Yes,
suspended it, right? They
yes,
suspended it.
yeah.
And I just read here, I just got an alert that Twitter capitulates finally and reinstates the New York Post account after a 16-day suspension, after they came out with that information on Bobulinski, along with all the other, I mean, basically the entire contents from the 3 terabyte contents from that hard drive was essentially, uh, what's the word I want to say? Uh, the bombshell report
Oh
and
yeah,
incriminating the contents on Hunter Biden's laptop was authenticated by the Bobulinski's testimony, right, where he goes into
yeah,
the type of deal, right,
yeah.
that was being the, with the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese
But
military.
100%. But even if you're for 100% for Biden, you should still be terrified by Twitter having that kind of power over people's
It's not Twitter.
thoughts.
No. What has become clear to me, at least, is that there are iron fist, very strong iron fists that have weight over these Silicon Valley giants, along with the mainstream media such as CNN, ABC, CBS. I mean, they are not. They have a complete blackout on this story, on this information, and you're seeing look, what's happening is you have someone like Jeff Greenwald who actually exposed the Biden,
Yes,
not
yeah.
right, when he wrote about the Biden hard drive. And this is the one who exposed back in 2013 the
Snowden.
Snowden revelations, right? He
Yeah,
got all the hard, in fact, Snowden, he was one of the 3 journalists that Snowden allowed in
yes,
his Hong Kong hotel room for 3 days, and to give them a tell-all, provide them all the data, share all the data that he took from the NSA,
right.
right, about the pervasive systemic spying, surveillance. And he was one of the only 3 reporters he would allow. And then when Jeff Greenwald had to step down from the Interceptor, which was an
Yeah.
organization that he actually co-founded because of the Biden, because of the article he wrote about Biden. That's very telling how powerful the deep state is. They penetrated even into the alternative media. They have massive iron fist control of the alternative media, not just the mainstream media now.
Well, I know, but there's two ways. There's another way to look at this. That is, you don't have to censor the news if you hire people that have a particular bias. So it's not like they're told what to do. They want to do what they're doing. They want to censor the news because they have this confirmation bias that won't allow them to be part of something that goes against what they believe should be happening.
Right. I agree. And those are the people who I call, you will vote for Biden and Kamala regardless, right? There's that contingent. Like, it doesn't matter. But here's the other issue. When you see MailChimp is deactivating accounts, sending false and inaccurate or misleading emails on the Bobulinski Biden laptop scandal,
Right,
right? I mean, people pay to be uh, to have a MailChimp account. And
right,
now
to send out
they are
emails.
being deactivated. They are being deactivated.
Well, there's been deactivations of rich people's bank accounts for trading in Bitcoin. There's been banks telling gun stores that they won't let them have an account with their
Right,
banks.
right,
The cancel culture is not just about, and I know 3 people that are the heads of schools
right,
and museums, and because they don't hate enough of a particular way, they're fired.
right, right.
You know,
Exactly. And even if the Senate Homeland Security Governmental Affairs confirms, which they confirmed, the information exposed by Hunter Biden's business associate Bobulinski, he connected that there was actual meetings and a money transfer to Vice President Biden at the time, right? Even though that has been confirmed, even though the Senate Homeland Security, there is still this, and I mean, there was his company venture with China.
yeah,
There
yeah,
is
yeah.
still this
Sinohawk.
Sinohawk, right? Right? There is still this kleptocracy, this iron fist imposing this, really imposing this truth embargo. And here's the problem: a majority of people, I'm going to say a majority of people in the New Age metaphysical community,
I don't speak for any of them.
right? I don't speak for any of them as well, but I will tell you this. My observation is they don't seem to either. Look, you know what it comes down to? It seems that they're not aware of it or they're willfully ignorant. And a
Well,
majority of them or
during the
willfully ignore.
60s, we didn't trust the government. We didn't trust the television news, even Walter Cronkite. And
Right,
for me, as somebody who survived the 60s, and I just came out of the 60s in my own life, I'm astounded that people will watch the news and believe it and not realize that people have been lying to people since
right,
time began.
right.
And
So,
that to say that there's no deep state, there's
right,
probably a deep state involved in whatever industry these people are involved with. They
right.
know
I mean,
yeah, so why wouldn't there be one in government?
absolutely. I mean, so this is the problem. This is the problem. We have a deep state election that's going on because it has been confirmed now by the Senate that the revelations that Joe Biden was aware and involved with the questionable business overseas dealings, particularly with China, right, has been verified independently now.
But you know
And
why people still don't want to see it? And it's not just like, when the ships came in and the native first people saw the ships and they just refused to believe they existed. My friend Bill Siegel, who's very smart, he wrote a book called The Control Factor.
mhm,
And there is within each one of us this thing to think, well, if this happens, not everything, but everything will be okay. I'm simplifying it
right,
tremendously.
right,
And
right, right,
there's people who think if we get rid of Israel, everything will be okay. If we get rid of the Muslims, everything will be okay, or
right.
things will be better. If Trump wins, everything will be okay.
If we get rid of Trump, everything will be okay. That's what most
Yes,
people are saying. That's what most people are thinking,
but
right?
that's what's happened. That's
That's
what's
what's
happened.
happened.
So okay, so you and I, when we looked at his chart and all this other stuff, I know before he ran, and people would say, "Well, what do you think?" I said, "Well, if he runs, he wins, but because of his chart." I'm I'm like a registered Green Party member. It's not like you know, I,
Right,
I voted for Ralph Nader. I'm just going
right,
by the astrology of the
right,
whole thing.
right.
And
Exactly.
and so I said, if he runs, he wins. And okay, so he wins. But what happens? Some people in the media hit him. And you and I know that he has Mars on his ascendant and he's a Leo rising like me, and he's a counterpuncher. So when you hit him, he hits you back. Really,
Right.
whether he's going down or not, he's going to hit you back.
He's an effective counterpuncher.
He's a very effective counterpuncher because he's a Gemini, especially. So if you think you can out talk him, you just can't. So
Right.
and I'm not
Well,
saying I love him or whatever, but all I'm saying is he
well,
counterpunched the media. So then all of
absolutely.
a sudden, these people who are so used to saying whatever the hell they want about people, and people aren't allowed to say anything about them, all of a sudden, he's the dog pulling down the curtain and showing that these people are just people too, and so he's attacking them. Then if you're a journalist and you don't attack Trump, you're not supporting your fellow journalists. And that comes in with the confirmation bias and the echo chamber. And it's just like, even people who say, well, maybe he's doing something good, like Van Jones the other day. Van Jones said he's not getting the credit for what he's done for the black community, that they're ready to rip him a new one.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment because right now, a report just came in that a senior Biden campaign official has stated anonymously that they have become increasingly worried over the low turnout among Black and Latino voters, particularly in key states such as Pennsylvania, Florida, and Arizona. And that means they were expecting early turnout, massive Black and Latino turnout like they saw with Hillary,
Right,
right? Not all right to put Biden over the top when the white vote shows up on Tuesday. That is not happening now.
right.
Right? In Pennsylvania, nearly 75% of registered Black voters have not voted yet, and that is not a good sign. They're saying they're getting desperate. They're putting out the red alert on this. All right. And here's what I'm predicting. I'm predicting that nearly 30% of the Black vote that has not turned out yet is going to turn out for Trump. And
Well,
that will be
you're absolutely
record breaking.
you're on par, because that's what Rasmussen just said,
Oh,
that
they
he
said
went
that?
yeah, he said they went from 27% to 31% in
Right.
like a week.
Right.
Uh,
So
uh, uh,
they haven't voted because they're waiting till election day to turn out. And uh, we're also seeing the same thing happen in the Latino community. We could see as much as 40% Latino turnout for Trump.
Yeah, yeah, and the thing is I'm a new age author. Yes, I don't speak for other new age people. I have to love everybody because I'm a new age author and I'm a sensitive new age guy. I
Right,
I I feel sorry for everybody who's brainwashed, and that goes every direction. But the astrology says what the astrology says. You and I know that astrology works. So
right. And
and
what we
I don't like free speech being squelched because that threatens everybody, no matter who you're
right.
voting for.
Right. And talk about free speech, the fact that they're manipulating the free speech, especially with the polls. You
Yeah,
even have Michael Moore saying now, I mean, this is a sign that things are not good in Biden land. If you're part of Team Biden, directly or indirectly, like Michael Moore is, it's not a good sign when he says, don't believe the polls, right?
right.
He's basically saying, do not believe the polls, suggesting that Biden has this giant lead.
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
he's telling he's telling people he's not seeing that in his home state of Michigan at
But
all.
you and your team see it as a close race.
Well, yeah, we do. We see it as razor thin wins for Trump in the key battleground states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and also I would include in that possibly Nevada, although I think Nevada will probably remain Democrat, but it's going to be really, really tight. The point is that these are traditionally Democratic states that went for Obama really big back in 2008 and 2012. Then instead of going for Hillary, they went to Trump.
Right,
And it seems, based on what we can tell, in terms of what my team could tell, is that those Obama Trump voters are going to vote for Trump by and large. Let's say 7 out of 10 of those voters, or eight out of 10. I would say even 8 out of 10 of those Obama Trump voters are going to vote for Trump again in those battleground states. So I don't really care what happens in New York. I don't care if you live in California, you tell me different. I'm telling everyone now, based on the astrology, based on the horary analysis, based on the electoral college map, that it looks like Trump is going to win the Obama voters for a second time.
that's very interesting. I mean, voting for Obama was sort of a no-brainer. But you're talking about Nevada as being Democrat, but Nevada has been shut down to the degree where so many people lost their jobs in the casinos and the theaters and the restaurants. And Biden's on record as saying he wants to shut things down if he's the president.
Right.
And Trump is, I mean, that's one of the clearest differences between the two of them. Forget all the nonsense about, he's horrible and whatever, but one wants to shut the economy down. And meanwhile, people in where you live are hurting, right? In Nevada?
Absolutely. We have nearly 50% of Nevada and Las Vegas residents in Nevada who are not able to pay their rent or mortgage this month, as of
And that's
November
gonna
1st.
that's gonna precipitate your kaboom when it works its way through the snake.
Right, right. So, Nevada's sort of a strange state in ways because it's traditionally red Republican, but because of the Californication of Nevada, everybody and his brother is moving here in
Right,
in droves, right? So they're taking their politics with them.
right.
They're trying to Californianize Nevada.
But they can't
And
get a job.
well, that doesn't count though. You have to understand. Like you have the weird California voter transplant who doesn't sort of equate what's happening in their local economy with their politics, right? So they tend to vote Democrat regardless. I'm voting for Kamala regardless. And so there's that a
No,
lot
because
of
they
that
hate
mentality
Trump. They hate Trump.
because
That's
they
what.
hate Trump. But they don't hate Trump because they have suffered the consequences of Trump's policies. They don't hate Trump for any
No.
rational reason. In fact,
Well, right.
yeah, I mean, it's actually Democratic policies in California, the actual socialist democratic policies, the
Right.
radical socialists Democratic policies in California has resulted in California's has a byproduct of that is the diaspora that is
Yeah,
occurring, out of California.
100%. But once again, he locked it down.
Oh yes,
Gavin Newsom locked it down more than anybody, even more
right,
than Cuomo.
right,
And so people are leaving, and it's like New York City where there was a moving truck on every corner for a while back in March.
right.
And the moving companies now in New York City are still turning people away. We don't have the trucks, we don't have the
There's
men.
a 9-month waiting list.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I'm saying. It's like hate Trump, hate Biden, love Biden. One wants to lock it down, one doesn't want to lock it down. Talk about voting your pocketbook. You're voting the lock on your door. Once someone wants to put you in prison and someone doesn't. So that's
I
why
mean,
I
there's going to
I believe in you and your team in a way more than my own astrological stuff because you have a great track record. But I see a landslide because of the lockdown stuff. I
it
think people are
should
going to
be a
say,
landslide, but I don't see it as a landslide. Now,
I know.
just so you know what a landslide technically is, it's 350 electoral college votes or greater. So I don't think
It's Nixon versus McGovern, 400
right.
electoral
Or
college.
Reagan versus Carter or Reagan versus Mondale. So I don't think look, I hope that happens. I hope it's a Trump
I'm not
landslide.
saying I hope it happens. I'm
But
just saying
right,
I think
but
it's
the
going to happen.
astrology, right. I mean, I personally think that Biden is a compromised agent of China at this point. It's really a Biden
It
crime family
seems
based
that way.
on the evidence that it has been emerging since the
It seems
15th.
that way.
Right, seems that
It
way.
does.
So that's my opinion. But the astrology, which is not my opinion, is
Right.
showing a definitive 300 plus race, not a electoral college landslide, but a strong, definitive Trump win come Tuesday night.
Well, 2016 wasn't it 312 or something like that? It's very
It
close to
was
what you're saying.
it was very close. Yeah, I think it was somewhere. I don't have the exact numbers, but it was around 306, something
Yeah.
like
So
that for
do
Trump.
you think he's going to lose? Do you think he's going to lose the popular vote again, like he did? Because Hillary
It,
got more popular votes.
yeah, it's quite possible he'll lose more of the popular vote instead of by 2-3%, more like 5%,
Wow.
because of certain states such as California or New York. So like,
Huh.
again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the popular vote, because the founding fathers
No, of course.
set it up where popular vote was irrelevant because they wanted all the states, all 50 states, to have equal say, all right, more, right, based on this electoral college system, which
It's
is what the
genius.
radical social left want to eradicate. They want to invoke a constitutional reform and rip out certain articles, particularly the Second Amendment,
Right.
along with a few
Right.
other things, all right,
Yeah.
and part of that would be a reformation or elimination of the electoral college and to go simply to a popular vote.
Well, there's too many things about what's going on now with some people that remind me of the whole Lenin Trotsky, the color revolution of Russia when the Bolsheviks and everybody took over a lot of stuff. I just saw something that I just couldn't believe. An organization has obtained a Zoom conference call between different people different groups that have decided that they're going to occupy federal buildings with weapons and that they're going to shut down Washington if Trump wins.
Absolutely. And I believe we're going to see shops boarded up ahead of the anticipated election night. We're seeing that happen in Vegas. They are shutting down the strip, they're shutting down many areas of the Vegas strip. They're preparing already now. They're actually sending out bulletins and emails. We actually received one that, and so we're seeing like just days, right? We're going to see it's really a countdown to chaos.
Wow, there's a good title for a book right there. I'm going to get a
Countdown to chaos, right?
countdown to chaos. I love it.
Right.
Well,
So
but
it really it's going to come down to the fact that if there's a definitive Trump win, or at least Trump is well ahead in electoral college by Tuesday night, then you'll see the chaos break out, and then there will be all sorts of contested election results between
yeah.
November 5th and December 12th.
Now you had originally uh, you and your team had originally predicted a more close race and you thought we wouldn't know anything until the Electoral College actually sat down and voted.
Well, we may not really know, based on what I'm seeing, who really will be the president in terms of Congress is the final say. They get to ratify the results of the Electoral College, reject the Electoral College like they did in 1876, and decide to set up their own voting, right? They decide to vote on who the president's going to be. And they could decide not to include Trump or they could decide to ultimately they could decide who's going to be the president. And there's a
Right.
certain provision in the Constitution on how they proceed with that. And that vote could be considered unconstitutional. It would go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court could reject what Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Congress, their result of, of them rejecting the Electoral College and coming up with their own presidential candidate. Nancy Pelosi could declare herself to be the presidential candidate
Yeah,
and
she's
be
number 3.
number 3, right? So she could end up being technically the president. This would be refuted most likely by the Supreme Court, by the Senate, by the White House. And then at that point, it would come down to a constitutional crisis. And meanwhile, you'll see America in chaos, right? While this is all happening. And then it will come down to it'd be a military issue where the military and the intelligence agencies would have to then make a decision. Who do we back? Nancy Pelosi and Congress, all right, or Trump, right? So it will come down to that. And when I say Nancy Pelosi, meaning that somebody's going to end up in handcuffs. It's if it ends up in a constitutional crisis. So look, is this guaranteed to happen? Absolutely no. But the astrology is arguing we are heading down that path.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've come to realize that Capricorn, where all the mashup is happening until the 21st, rules tribes, and the whole
Mm-hmm.
tribal situation
Right,
is so prevalent now. And plus, the last time Neptune was in Pisces and Uranus was in Taurus was in the run up to the American Civil War.
right,
So once I saw that, I started seeing the word Civil War in every article, and now it's reached every article. Um,
right,
so and I always thought, well, it can't be a civil war because there's no Union South Army and versus the South, and but
right,
then you
right,
start seeing, that it's more like the Revolutionary War where families are torn apart because some people want to stay with the British and some people want to go over to the Americas.
right.
Um,
Exactly.
I mean, I am a great believer in let's all try and send pot. I know this sounds new agey. I know it. But I think, as Einstein said, and it's right up here, the underlying principle of religion is
Mm-hmm.
the sense of the mysterious. There could be what they used to call the Jesus factor. I don't know if you ever heard of that book. There was a book called The Jesus Factor, and the proposition was they dropped the nuclear bomb, but it doesn't go off because God won't let it.
Right. Well, I hope
So
that's true.
yeah, so maybe there's going to be, some kind of miracle. Maybe the UFOs will come down and do a Klaatu Barada Nikto. You know,
Well, let's hope so. I mean, for those of you who have a lot of money invested in Wall Street right now, a number of my hedge fund clients have informed me, have actually inquired to me and saying, "Listen, we're bracing for some massive, terrifying risk as we get closer to the election date. There's a possibility we could see like a 30% plunge, uh, possibly next week when the chaos breaks out. If the chaos breaks out, hopefully it
but
won't break out. But I
right.
believe there will be some chaos and it could go national. I believe they know it's coming. And
Well,
for those
yeah,
of
but
you, yeah,
do you think that the riots are going or any kind of chaos like that would cause that, or they're just using that as cover for the kaboom you've been
to
predicting for
well,
so long?
like a deep state coup to overrun to challenge the results of the election, the electoral college, to put in their own person, probably Kamala Harris. Won't it will probably be Kamala Harris. The Congress will reserve the right to decide who will be president, make that vote, and then it will go and be fought out with the Supreme Court in Congress versus the Supreme Court. This could get really, really messy. I think we will not know for certain until January who the president will really be because I see this going to the courts.
Wow, wow,
And
that's quite the prediction.
Well, let's hope I'm wrong, and let's hope that they have enough on Biden that Trump, through indirect channels, lets Biden know if you don't concede soon, we will prosecute you. Right? So, do you want to play this game? Do you want to play that type of dangerous game? Right? So, I believe that it's possible Biden will concede because of that emerging scenario where there will be an arrest on Hunter. And they'll go after the entire Biden crime family. In other words, there'll be indictments, prosecutions, and they will lock them up. And I believe that's possible between November 5th and January 6th when Congress meets to ratify or to reject the results of the Electoral College, which occurred in 1876.
But
So we could see a repeat.
I'm sorry, can they reject it if it's
Yes,
overwhelming? Even if it's
they can
400?
reject it. Congress can reject it, but Nancy Pelosi has the prerogative to reject it. That's why she's the third most powerful person in Washington. And Congress is the one that decides the president. If you look at the Constitution, Congress is the body that ratifies, determines who will be president on January 20th, 12 noon,
That's
not
interesting.
the Supreme Court.
Right.
The Supreme Court could only recommend or address Congress if Congress acted within the Constitution, but Congress can reserve the right to supersede the Supreme Court.
In other
They,
words, but that doesn't need like a certain level of closeness before it kicks in. It's just baked into the cake. They can do it just because they want to do it.
Well, they did it in 1876, just like we had a global financial reset, right? In 1933, when they closed the banks for 8 days and they reopened it and they took your gold and half your money and they said, carry on and keep a stiff upper lip. And that's what people did. I'm telling
Right.
you, they did it then. They could do it now. And Nancy Pelosi has already informed Biden not to concede because she has a plan. She is an agent of the deep state. I know this. I know this, but most people out there who are going to vote for Kamala regardless and the big guy, they don't get it. They don't see it, and they don't understand history. They don't understand the constitutional process of elections, the electoral college, etc., and what could go wrong and what has historically gone wrong. Because you could have it where Pennsylvania can't. We don't know what the real vote in Pennsylvania is, even
Right.
if it's leaning Trump, and then Biden can Harvard ballast, or they can harvest all these
Harvest
ballots.
ballots.
Right, right. And then they can send their own electors to supersede the Pennsylvania electors in the upcoming December 14th, the day of the solar eclipse, by the way, electoral college. So that happened. That has happened before as well. So look, this thing could get really messy, and people, just because Trump is ahead by 2 a.m. on November 4th, isn't going to mean much if the deep state is playing for keeps.
So if you're saying that even if he did have a landslide victory of 400 electoral college, that Nancy Pelosi could still do, make a rehash of
Right. Well,
the
no, 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 no. I'm not saying that. If it's 400 electoral college, or if it's 538, if it's every state in the union, it's over. But if it comes down to where it's like 305 electoral college, 306 for Trump, 233 for Biden, they can, over a period of time between November 4th and December 12th, flip the votes, pass those flip votes and petition in the electoral college, right, to have Biden to be certified, that then will be passed along to Congress, where Nancy Pelosi would then ratify that result.
wow. So once again, we live in the Chinese curse of interesting times.
Right, right. So again, I don't want to misrepresent myself or us here talking about this. That this absolutely will happen, but the astrology, specifically the mundane astrological portents, specifically is auguring a high probability, let's say, of a contested election that will go to the state courts, civic courts, state courts, and very likely the Supreme Court in order to determine who will be ratified to be president by January 6th.
God, I'm going to sell a lot of divination systems. No one, no one knows what's going on. Everybody's going to want to know what's going on. They'll be asking their karma cards and their enchanted
Right.
tarot and all this other stuff.
Well, you're going to get very busy with your Wall Street clients because I'm going to tell you something. You think people are going to go out Christmas shopping, Thanksgiving celebration. They're going to keep their money in the stock market, that their 401k is safe and sound. You think this is all going to continue like it is?
No, no.
No.
The really smart money people that I know have shifted their focus to Australia and New Zealand and places like that, moved there or established residences in
Or
places
move
like
their
that.
money. They move
Yeah,
their money,
definitely. Definitely. Well,
right?
especially Australia. But Australia right now, I think they sort of got bit on the people that moved to Australia because they're having a lot of problems with China there with the raw materials and yeah, Australia has problems of its own.
Yeah, I believe the supply chain disruption in Australia is
Exactly.
really hitting
Yeah.
home now. And we're going to
Yes.
see that pick up even more so when the COVID-19 wave B really hits, right?
Yeah.
And, Belgium just announced a 6-week national lockdown. It looks like all these countries in Europe are going into lockdown. That's not too
Yes.
far away from happening here in Australia. So between all the chaos, right, occurring and the COVID wave B, and the fact that the markets are about to teeter into a very nasty bear market, right?
Right.
Certainly, this is going to trigger it. This is going to be a very, very volatile, chaotic time, and I think people need to get ready for it. Go out and celebrate Halloween, have fun, do your divination,
Yes.
you know, celebrate, enjoy, get a reading if you can.
Yes.
This is certainly
Or
a
read
good
for
time.
yourself.
Right. And read for yourself. This is a great time to read for yourself. All right. And but be warned. To be forewarned is to be forearmed, right? Right,
That's
Monte?
correct. That's the classic. Yes. And also remember what you posted here with
Mm-hmm.
Einstein's sense of the mysterious as the religious principle. He said you could live like everything is a miracle or like nothing is a miracle. And he present,
Exactly.
and he preferred to live like everything is a miracle.
Right.
So
Right.
every day
So
we wake up is a miracle.
right. Well, I want to finish up the show by telling everyone to keep the faith, stay safe out there, celebrate the holiday. This is a great festival holiday. Do whatever you can, even if it's for me, I'm just going to watch some scary. There's a number of really great Halloween films, very well acclaimed. Some with Vincent Price in it that I haven't
Oh my
seen. I
God.
saw snippets of it on TV, so I'm gonna probably watch a few of those this weekend. Really try just sort of engage in the symbolism and in the holiday spirit, because I know we are now going into winter. Winter is here.
You're right. Winter is not coming. Winter is here.
Winter is here.
To go Game of Thrones on everybody.
And then some.
This was a
All
lot
right.
of fun.
Yes, Monty, this is great. I really had a great time talking with you about this, and I certainly think an Eggy Casey show, especially uh, down the line, is certainly something we can explore amongst some other things that, again, I think it's a great time to have another show on UFOs and take it at a deeper level, especially with the most
Sure.
recent Nixon time capsule revelations that have just emerged. So,
Awesome.
yeah, yeah. So let's do that. And I want to wish you a great Halloween holiday.
Thank you. And the
And
same to you.
yeah, so I look forward to talking with you again soon. And for everybody out there, please be safe. Please
Right.
be safe. Do what you have to do. Don't put yourself in any harm's way, or don't take any unnecessary risk
Unnecessary
at this time.
risks.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. And this is a good weekend to not only celebrate but go out and shop. Whatever you definitely think you'll need over the next several weeks, certainly between now and the end of the month, when the potential for chaos and mayhem could break out. You don't have to be going to the store. You don't need gas. You don't need things. So just be prepared as best as you can. Hopefully, what we discussed today in the second half of the show will not occur. This will be a one and done election. Everything goes back to normal, and we just carry on. But it's quite possible we may not see that, so we have to be prepared for it.